So I said I would do another Q&A session this weekend. Here I am again. And I put it to a vote what category I should do because I've just got this massive Trello board of questions. And I want to do my best to answer them, but it's kind of gotten to a point where it's sort of overwhelming. And I just need to focus on one kind of coherent category at the time. Otherwise, my brain is going to turn to mush and pour out of my ears because I'll be just context switching between all these different question types. So it looks like it's actually surprisingly even split. Learning comes out ahead, followed by coding, then Math Academy, then productivity. But I was kind of surprised to see just how I thought there was going to be one category where like most people want to hear most about. My prediction was actually that learning was going to come out ahead, but I thought it was going to be like something like 70% learning and then like 10% Math Academy, 10% coding, 10% productivity, something like that. Yes, learning came out ahead, but yeah, I guess there's interest in the others too. So I'm going to focus on learning for this Q&A session, but I'll do other sessions that are focused on the other categories. I guess I'll probably just do coding next, and then Math Academy, then productivity, and then circle back to learning or something like that. So this morning I was going through all the questions on learning, and there were just too many for a single session. Like when I answer a question here, I want to actually like give it a good answer that I can think properly about, and not just have to like spit out something like a 30-second or 1-minute answer at surface level and move on to the next thing, because that's not fun for me. That's not even really informative, and it's like I want to get to the point where I'm actually kind of thinking deeply about these questions, which means I kind of have to filter the questions that I'm answering and just kind of start with the ones that I think I'm ready to kind of get deep into. So I pulled those questions out on the side here. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 questions that I'd like to cover today, and probably talk for like, I don't know, maybe like 5 to 10 minutes on each question, just to give it a proper answer. So let's just jump into it. Well, okay, maybe I'll just say that. So the questions that I'm going to answer here to preview, we got some questions about working memory, about chunking. We got some about recommended how to go about studying something like data structures and algorithms, but I think it generalizes to other topics or other fields as well. We've got questions about like the physical aspect of learning, like writing stuff down or using your body. Got questions about learning versus understanding versus like doing problems, drawing distinctions between those things. We've got questions about learning versus just applying a formula without understanding or how to derive it, and questions about the curriculum for schools and universities, and if I had to redesign it, what would I change? Are the groupings good? So each of these each of these, there's just a lot that comes to mind. And so I'm just going to do kind of a brain dump on each of one of these questions. So, all right, so starting with this one here. Most people can only hold about 7 digits, or more generally, 4 chunks of coherently grouped items in working memory. So Fabian says, this is really fascinating. I tried it with 8 digits and my brain just grouped them into 3 groups instead. 26, 356, 235. Is there any research on compaction done to increase working memory capacity? Yeah, that's a good question. I think there's one distinction to make here, though, is that when you chunk stuff up like this, and leverage those chunks to store additional information in working memory, you're not actually increasing your working memory capacity. You're managing to activate more information in your brain and hold that information, but you're not actually increasing your working memory capacity. And I know that sounds like a little like, what is working memory capacity if not the amount of information you're holding? But the way to think about this is to think back to, like, at a physical level. What does working memory capacity mean at a physical level in your brain? And what it really means is it's the amount of effort that you can devote to maintaining intentional, persistent neural activity. So the way when you're thinking about stuff, this is all like neural activity in your brain, and there's neurons being activated. This activity is spreading throughout to connections to other neurons, and when somebody tells you these numbers, you are intentionally rehearsing a particular activity patterns to keep those numbers in your head. So like 26, 356, 235. You're rehearsing those numbers, trying not to let that activity dissipate, just continually trying to fuel it. You're trying to fuel that activity, and that takes effort. Now, so remember that the working memory capacity is like your capacity of effortful rehearsal of information in the brain. Now, you can make this information easier to rehearse in a way that is not actually increasing your working memory capacity. Then in a way that is not actually increasing the amount of effort that you can put forth. And the way that you make it easier to rehearse is by leveraging long-term memory. Long-term memory is kind of it's the connectivity that's like baked into your brain from longer-term learning. It's what's already been wired up in your brain. So when you learn information and you kind of retain it for the long term, it's stored as like connectivity patterns in your brain. It's like electrical wiring in a sense. And so this electrical wiring makes it easier for neural activation to spread throughout your brain. So previously, stuff that you would have to rehearse, like if you wanted to activate a bunch of, say this is just, I'm trying to make this a concrete example. Say you have 3 neurons in a line. This is like obviously very oversimplified, but just for the sake of a concrete example, say you have 3 neurons in a line and they're not connected at all, and you have to activate every single one of them. So you have to put forth intentional effort to activate those 3 neurons. Now, if you wire this up in long-term memory, that like these neurons are associated with each other in some way, this is like a more coherent neural pattern, then you can activate just just one of them, and that activation can naturally spread to the others through the neural wiring that represents your long-term learning. So in that sense, you are able to activate the full pattern of those 3 neurons, but with a lot less effort, because you only have like to maintain that activation, you only have to intentionally like try to keep one of those neurons active. It just naturally spreads to the others. So when you chunk information like this, you're relying more on long-term memory to make this information easier to rehearse in working memory. And so you can also kind of think, another way to think about this in a concrete example is, imagine, there have been studies done with chess players, right? And you can show a chess player, like a very serious, experienced master chess player, you can show them a chessboard and they can just know it. They can recall, like you can show it to them briefly and have them regenerate it from memory what they saw, and they can do a really good job of that. If you do that to a novice, somebody who has not had a whole lot of experience playing chess, has not mastered the game, they cannot do the same thing. And the reason why is because the expert has these long-term memory representations of what's going on in the chess game that allow them to chunk up this chessboard into a smaller amount of effortful rehearsal of neural activity. There's less that they have to remember in order to represent the full board in their brain. There's less that they have to effortfully keep active in their working memory in order to have access to all the information contained in the board in their brain. So they might think of it like, well, there's a certain situation happening in this side of the board, and then on the bottom of the board, it's more of like a more standard initialization of the chessboard, and maybe in this other part, there's another situation that's happening, and like they view it in chunks. It's not just memorizing like, okay, there's a rook at A1. There is a say there's a pawn at D7 or whatever, wherever the pieces are. They're not memorizing like every square what is where. That's not how they're thinking about it. They're thinking about it at like a top level. What are the chunks that are happening in the chessboard? But a novice does not have these chunks in long-term memory. A novice has not seen these situations play out in the game before. They don't have these. They don't see the forest for the trees. All they see is the trees. And so the novice is more paying attention to in order to remember the chessboard, they have fewer chunks, lower resolution, or the chunks are more granular, and they have to juggle more of these chunks. Maybe if this is the first time they're seeing the chessboard, then they don't even have any chunks at all. They just have like what piece is at one, or is at what square in the chessboard. And so the really interesting thing too is like, if you take that same expert, the reason you know that they are storing this information in chunks in their brain is because if you show them a totally random configuration of a chessboard, that's not like anything they would have seen before in a game, just like something that they wouldn't have naturally chunked up through practice, because it's a configuration that doesn't really make sense, is not explored in the game of chess, then they have no chunks to leverage in their long-term memory, and they do a much worse job of recalling the information on the chessboard. So it kind of comes down to the long-term memory. The buildup of long-term memory allows you to effectively increase your working memory capacity by pulling in more information for you to use in your working memory without requiring you to devote more mental effort to rehearsing that information. So the distinction here is really working memory capacity. It's tempting, but incorrect to think of it as an information capacity. It's an effort capacity, not an information capacity. And when you store more information in long-term memory, you can then bring in more of that information into working memory capacity, or into working memory, even though you're not increasing your mental effort to rehearse that information. And so that's really the trick to being able to do more, to develop skills, is to have as much information baked into long-term memory as possible, so you can just pull it out of long-term memory and have these nice chunks that you can work with in working memory. And so you can be dealing with that with more information in working memory without having to actually increase the effort that you're putting forth in working memory. Now, I guess the natural question is, like, how do you increase the amount of actual effort that you're able to put forth in working memory? And the answer to that is it's unclear at this point. I did a literature search on this like a year ago, and what I took away from the literature search, if anybody knows, and if anybody knows of new news on this, feel free to comment and let me know. But as of last year, it seemed like the general state of things was it's unclear whether it's even possible to increase your working memory capacity in that effort sense of how many digits or how many chunks can you actually hold in your brain in working memory, actively rehearsing. And there have been a lot of studies. Like, obviously, this is something that would be really cool if you could increase your working memory capacity reliably. But there have been a lot of situations in the research where you have somebody practice something like a digit span test. Like, here, like, how many digits can you remember in this string of random digits? And you can train somebody to improve on that task. But if you then try to evaluate them on a different working memory loading task that's also meant to measure their working memory capacity in some kind of different sort of context, they tend not to improve on the other contexts. It's like, what ends up happening is they learn how to do the task well by finding a hack around the task to leverage long-term memory instead of actually leveraging instead of actually being able to put more effort in working memory. They find some way to exploit the circumstances of the situation and and get their long-term memory involved. And so that's kind of I don't know if you've heard of like memory palaces before, where you have like you think of like being in some house or some room, and you've got like different information in different boxes or shelves or stuff like that. That's an example of a kind of hack. You're not actually, if you train yourself to be able to develop a memory palace and remember like and increase your ability on a working memory loading task by putting this information into by associating it with existing information in long-term memory. That's not actually increasing your working memory capacity in the sense of what the capacity is typically meant to represent, which is the amount of effort, because you are leveraging this information, this information structure that's already in your long-term memory. You're mapping the working memory task onto a task that you can receive assistance with from long-term memory, and then it ceases to be just a working memory loading task. And your performance improvement then comes from your ability to integrate your working memory with the long-term memory, or to store more information in long-term memory, or to have structures in there that better map onto the working memory task. So that's the challenge. It's like you can improve your performance on various working memory loading tasks, but it doesn't seem to transfer reliably onto other working memory loading tasks. It's kind of fuzzy in my brain, but I think there were a couple cases where I saw some papers on where somebody was able to increase on one working memory loading task, and the increase carried over partially into another task that was sort of similar in nature. But then as you get kind of further away from that sort of task, the effect diminishes. So the state is just a little, it seemed pretty nebulous to me. It didn't seem like there was a whole lot of support for the idea that you can train your working memory capacity to actually carry over beyond that, like that specific loading task into like real life situations like academics. And I remember one thing that stuck out at me is I was reading a bunch of work from some math interventionists who, like, they would work with students who were experiencing difficulty in math, and sometimes these difficulties would stem from working memory issues, where they just had low working memory or struggling to keep all the information in their head. And the interventionists, it seemed like they were all agreeing that the most effective and proven way to go about resolving this situation and helping the kid get over the hump of learning this math is to just focus on storing as much math in long-term memory as possible. So it's not about like training them to increase their effort because their rehearsal effort, because it doesn't seem like there's a reliable way to make that possible. But you can, by having the students practice their foundational skills more and more, and scaffold by having them go through a highly scaffolded learning experience, where whatever you're asking them to do that they're having trouble with, you break that down into subskills and then have them practice the subskills. Just break it down into a chunk that they can actually fit in their working memory capacity, and then have them practice that chunk, that skill, enough that they can write it into long-term memory, and write it well into long-term memory, like retain it. Develop automaticity, so that way they can just put those skills together as chunks to scaffold themselves up to the main skill that you're trying to teach them. Now, I should say this is not like, I'm not saying that it's impossible to increase your working memory capacity. I'm just saying it doesn't seem like there's been any real serious support for that idea yet. But it's definitely really interesting. But at the current state of things, at the current state of research, it seems like your best bet, if you want to increase your working memory capacity, your best bet is to just write more relevant information into long-term memory and develop a level of automaticity on that information, that you can just recall it very easily and leverage it for chunking purposes. And if you try to train yourself on a working memory loading task like this digit span, how many digits can you remember, and you manage to improve your ability, you shouldn't expect that to carry over into other aspects of your life. It reminds me of one of the papers on somebody who trained their digit span. It turned out what they were doing is they were chunking the numbers kind of like this into groups of multiple numbers, and then remembering those groups as running times. So they would have I forget how many numbers in a group, but they would like think about like a mile time, or like a 5K time, or like a half-mile running, or whatever. They had these. They knew a lot about running, so they were able to. They knew what was a slow mile time, a fast mile time, the world record mile time. They knew this for other distances as well. So they could store a chunk of many digits, just as like an idea of like a fast mile time, and then they could then like chunk that information of like the description of like the speed and distance. They could then chunk that, somehow the sequence of those into some kind of event, maybe like a story of somebody who runs like a fast mile and then like a slow mile or something like that. They managed to do this, and they got to a really long digit span, but yeah, that didn't actually mean. I mean, they could hold like hundreds of digits in working memory, but if you ask them to remember like a sequence of colors, for instance, like it wouldn't transfer over the same way. All right, on to the next question. So next question was, for somebody studying data structure and algorithms, but I think this generalizes to a lot of different situations. Would you recommend to memorize a lot of problems early on in a regurgitation fashion, just so the data is cached in your brain in some way? So for instance, yeah, have one phase be like typing the algorithm over and over, and then go into deep understanding, or do most simultaneously, similar to how they learned piano, playing scales, and then Yeah. All right. So I think I think there is value to going through the motions, even if you don't fully understand what it is you're doing. Now, would I say that you have to solve 100 problems of the same type, just going through the motions, not understanding what you're doing? No, that sounds really excessive and inefficient. Um, and would I say that you shouldn't even try to fully wrap your head around the thing first? No, that also it. Okay. I think here's the way I would put it. If you're learning a new thing, say breadth first search, some algorithm, um, then yeah, start out trying to wrap your head around it. If it makes sense to you, and you can think, and you can fit it all in your head and develop some intuition about around it, and then go implement it, then like that's great. That'll make your life a lot easier. Um, but if you are struggling to keep the algorithm in your head, it's not really making sense to you. You're trying to eat the whole elephant in one bite, and you can't fit it in your mouth. Then then I think that's when it's really helpful to do to just go practice going through the motions to cache some of that information, stored in long-term memory. So that way, like we just talked about with working memory capacity, if you are having trouble fitting something in your working memory capacity, how do you go about resolving the situation? Well, just develop as many try to chunk it up as well as you can in your long-term memory, so you can rely on those chunks. So um, if breadth first search isn't making sense to you, you read the algorithm and you don't really get it, then try to do it. Maybe think about trying to do it in a simpler case, or if you're already in the simplest case and it's not making sense, then yeah, just write it out, get used to where everything goes in the algorithm, and that way you'll take some of the load off of your working memory, and you'll have more mental bandwidth to think about why things are happening in that way. Why is the algorithm set up the way it is? Um, and I think I think I think the failure mode that people typically fall into, um, in this sort of situation, is being too resistant to go through the motions. Um, like just thinking that if they I think the problem that people often run into is they'll look at this really hard algorithm that's kind of, just beyond, they're kind of out of their depth and trying to fit that in their head, in their working memory, and they think that just by trying to they'll just continue staring at it, continue trying to eat the whole thing in one bite in working memory, um, even though it's not working out for them, and they're confused, and it's not making any sense, and and they'll hold on to that for way too long, um, but before they start actually just trying to write the algorithm out a bunch of times, or trying to look at a special case, um, and and then they just never learn the algorithm. So um, I'm not saying that like you shouldn't understand algorithms. That's not what I'm saying at all. But what I'm saying is, if you are having trouble wrapping your head around a tricky algorithm, or math concept, or procedure, or whatever it is you're trying to understand, um, then yeah, doing a kind of regurgitation practice can scaffold you up to wrapping your head around it. I don't think there's any weakness in that it's just sometimes you don't have the right mental representations to fit something into your working memory, so you need to build up some chunks, and that's kind of all there is to it. It's like, think about it like this. It's like if you are engaged in, say you're a gymnast, all right, and you want to learn how to backflip, or say you want to become a gymnast. You want to you want to learn some gymnastics, and you want to backflip, and you're not able to backflip, and you're just totally confused, and maybe you try it once on the mat, and you don't even get close to making it. You just like completely face plant, and it's just really, it doesn't seem like it's working out, and you're like, wow, that was terrible. I don't think I'm going to be able to do this. Now the question is, what should you do? Should you just keep on going to try to do the backflip again and again and again and again until you continue making no progress and you hate it and you've given up on your goal? Or should you just find like a progression that scaffolds things out for you? And maybe you're starting off with a skill that's a lot simpler than a backflip, and it's not a real backflip, and you can't claim it's a real backflip. But if you learn that skill, and then you learn another skill, and you learn another skill, then you'll be within striking distance of the backflip. Of course, it's a no-brainer. That's the way you got to do it. If you don't, then you don't get over the hump. You don't make progress. So yeah, I think memorization, regurgitation, it's a tool in the toolbox. There's a right time to use it, and there's a wrong time to use it. You can't just regurgitate an algorithm and say that you know it, because you need to be able to apply it in different contexts as well. And if you don't actually understand this algorithm, you're not going to know how to tweak it in different contexts. But at the same time, does that mean that you should never memorize, like do rote memorization or regurgitation? No. You can use that as a tool, and you can build these chunks in your long-term memory that get you closer to fully wrapping your head around it. I think the thing that a lot of people, the problem that a lot of people have with regurgitation is really just when a student is able to get by in a curriculum with only regurgitating information, and really that doesn't speak poorly of regurgitation so much as it does of the curriculum. It just means that the curriculum has not forced the student to develop a flexible enough mental representation with the information. So like if there is a coding class and all it has the student do is regurgitate the code for a breadth first search algorithm, that's not enough. They should be able, or they should be made to apply this algorithm to build upon additional, more advanced skills that tweak the breadth first search algorithm in some ways, where it kind of forces a deeper understanding and applying it in different problem contexts. Maybe answering some elaboration question, or that like maybe a bug diagnosis question, like suppose that the breadth first search algorithm is failing in a particular way. What could be the root cause? And they have to identify a bug in the code that could have caused that issue. That's what I would do back when I was teaching computer science, and like this hardcore quantitative computer science track. I would always have these kind of failure mode diagnosis questions where students would they would have to essentially be like doctors for their code. The code presents these symptoms. Tell me what might be the underlying bug in it. And we're going to do a lot of that in our upcoming machine learning course on Math Academy. So yeah, I think it all just comes down to using the right tool for the job at the right time, just whatever's going to get you over the hump. All right. Next question. All right, one more detail. This is the same guy who asked the previous question. One more detail or question I have is, what do you think about the physical aspect to math and coding? For instance, writing and typing stuff down, or visualizing spaces by using your body. So again, I think it just comes down to if it's helping you develop long-term memory representations that can scaffold the process, make it easier for you to chunk this information into working memory, just make the brain activity flow to the right areas naturally, then yeah, that can be helpful. So one thing I do think helps is writing down your work in math, because there's in addition to developing a memory of the steps involved in solving a problem, you can actually develop like a kind of muscle memory for the whole process of solving like an algebra equation. So you might think like maybe you've got an algebra equation and then you write like -4 on both sides of the equation and then draw a line under it and write the equation again. That's kind of, I could see that like developing a kind of muscle memory approach of whenever it's like it kicks off a train of thought, like, okay, once you start writing like -4 on one side of the equation, then like you just feel it like in your bones. You have to do that on the other side of the equation also. And then after you've got on both sides of the equation, you just feel it in your bones. Okay, time to draw the line and write down the new sides of the equation. Now, again, back to the regurgitation and rote memorization. Is this muscle memory that's going on like in your actual like hand motions? Is that fully understanding the rationale behind what you're doing? Not entirely, no. But is it getting you closer to a point where you can fully understand what it is you're doing? Yeah, because it's causing the process to take up less space in your working memory, so you can think about more what it is you're doing. Now, does that mean that you have to learn all of math by remembering like the hand motions for each equation? No, that doesn't mean that you have to have a physical reflex for each kind of equation. It's just that this can kind of provide some scaffolding for you in the learning experience. I guess it's like, does everybody have to do it? No. Not everyone has to write down the -4 on both sides of the equation, but can it be helpful for wrapping your head around what's happening? If you're having trouble grasping the concept of what's happening, can going through the physical aspect of writing down, drawing the line, balancing the equations, like does it help you? Yeah, if you develop muscle memory on that process, it helps you form a better representation to kind of condense the size of the problem down in your head, so that you can so you don't feel like you're like chin deep drowning in the complexity of the problem. And you can start to wrap your head around it more. Now, I should say that I think it is a good thing for students to write down their work, um, even if they don't necessarily need to at this point in their math learning. Like say you've got somebody who's learning algebra and it's clicking, it's making a lot of sense. They feel like they don't need to write down this -4 on both sides of the equation, draw the line, write down the equation again. They can just it just makes sense to them how to go about solving the problem, like fully in their head. Then like, okay, you don't necessarily have to write down your work in order to learn this concept, but I think it's a good habit to develop, because there comes a point where you have to write down your work, and writing down your work is it's kind of a skill that you benefit from training up alongside your math proper content knowledge. I can't tell you how many times I've seen kids struggle because they get this idea that doing math in your head is really cool. If you like the bigger of an equation you can just solve in your head, the cooler you are. So this kind of gets baked into them, and then they get to a point where they're struggling to solve an equation, but they're just resistant to writing it down, and they just continue to struggle. They don't want to write it down, and then they get they don't wrap their heads around it. They get stuff wrong. They're just kind of being confused because they're too they just got too big of an ego to write down their work. Everyone gets to the point where math becomes too big to fit in your head, and you have to use the scratch paper as kind of like an extension of your working memory. And it takes practice to get to that point. So oftentimes when a kid doesn't want to use scratch paper, they're flailing on the problem, but they got too big of an ego. They don't want to use scratch paper. Part of it is the ego, but another part of it is the problem has become so complicated, and they haven't practiced up their skill of writing things down, that they're not even sure really how they would go about organizing their work for the problem. So it turns into the situation where there's a lot of factors that are keeping them from writing things down, which is the thing that they need to do to get over the hump of solving the problem and learning additional math. And I'd always call it, back when I was teaching, I would call that like the day of reckoning with all these math learners. Because I would see like, oh, this one kid never wants to write anything down, starting to make some silly mistakes because he's doing everything in his head. And then I would just know, like, okay, well, 6 months from now or 3 months from now or however many months, there's going to be a point where the kid just cannot make any more progress because they're making silly mistakes. They're failing to wrap their head around what's going on, all because they're not using scratch paper. And they're going to think that it's a shortcoming in the instruction, and they're going to try to blame the instruction for it, but it's a them problem. They're just not using the scratch paper effectively. And the longer you wait, the worse of a problem it is. You just gotta get those habits in place kind of early on if you want the rest of the learning experience to be smooth. Otherwise, you're gonna get to a point where you can't make any more progress. It's like, okay, here's another analogy for the situation. It's like I think Jason came up with this one a long time ago when we were talking about it. But it's like if you have like a sports team and a bunch of like novice athletes, and there might be one athlete who is particularly fast. Like they're just naturally fast. They've got the right body frame to be fast. They have they've got great musculature and mobility in their legs, and they can just power around everybody. Let's just say it's basketball. They can just outrun they can beat everybody at this level just by leaning into the fact that they're fast. The analogy here is kind of like, this is like a kid who has a really large working memory, and they don't have to write anything down. They can just lean into this skill at this point in their journey, and everything's easy because they are faster than all the other basketball players, or they can fit more in their head than all the other math students. Their ability is large relative to the problem scope. But if they get kind of complacent, or just kind of cocky about this skill of running fast, and they think they don't need to learn all the other fundamentals. They don't need to learn how to pass the ball, because they don't pass the ball. They just take the ball, run really fast down the court, and do a layup. They don't have to do learn to do jump shots. They don't have to learn to shoot 3-pointers. All they have to do is run really fast and then do a layup. And that's all they have to do. They might exploit that strategy a ton early on in their journey, but eventually it's going to catch up with them, because other people are going to develop their abilities to the point that being insanely fast is no longer good enough on its own. In the same way, the math problems are going to get hard enough that being able to do a ton in your head is no longer good enough on its own. You also have to lean into your scratch paper. And basically it just comes down to you can't be a one-trick pony, because that gets old after a while. The game catches up with you as the level of sophistication rises. So you want to make sure that you are developing yourself kind of like across the board, all those other skills that maybe you technically don't need right now, but you need to make sure that when it comes time that you really need to start leaning into them, that you've developed them to a point that you're able to do so smoothly. All right, let's go on to the next question. All right, next one is what do you think about learning equals understanding something? For example, whenever I read a math theorem, I truly sit with it and understand the reasoning behind it. Have I grasped the theorem, or is there a hole in my understanding that can only be filled by applying it? All right, so there's two things that pop into my head immediately. There's an in theory answer, and there's an in practice answer. So in theory, can you read a theorem and try to understand the reasoning behind it, and do that well enough that you don't have any holes in your understanding? Sure. I mean, it doesn't seem like it's necessarily impossible, but in practice, you would have to. In practice, that just doesn't work out like that, because nobody is that smart. Then maybe you're that smart at the beginning, like we're just talking about, at the beginning of your math learning journey. Maybe a theorem about about algebra just comes really, really easy to you. Maybe you are handed the quadratic formula. This is essentially a theorem about algebra, right? It's stating that this formula provides the solutions to this quadratic equation. Maybe you're handed this formula and you fully understand that you plug in the coefficients of the equation into this formula, and you understand, you immediately jumps out to you like, oh, well, the thing inside the square root might be positive or negative or zero, and that kind of governs the amount of solutions. But you're going to get to a point where it doesn't work like that anymore. Nobody has infinite intelligence. Even the world's smartest mathematicians, they get to the point where they are wrestling with material that is complex enough that there's no way to get through it without holes in their understanding, unless they are solving, like applying it in special cases to get a feel for it. I think yeah, the students who are typically like really good at math, that comes naturally to them. When they are reading a theorem and it looks like they just get it, what they're actually doing is thinking about sort of edge cases of the theorem and kind of working through examples sort of in their head. And most of the time, students need to explicitly practice that. Most of the time, students don't do that naturally. They just read the theorem. They're like, okay, the words make sense. I got it. And there are varying degrees of this. And what the problems are meant to do is they are meant to expose you to situations where maybe you read the theorem, you say like, okay, this makes sense. I understand the reasoning behind it. And then the problem smacks you in the face because you're like, wait, I thought I understood the reasoning behind it, but I don't know exactly how to solve this problem. This seems a little complicated. And it forces you to go back and understand the things that you missed out on the first time. I guess what I'm trying to say is like, nobody is so smart that at all levels of math, they can just look at a theorem and say like, oh, I understand this fully, and be completely sure that they're not missing some portion of it. Because if you, I mean, just think about it. If there were a portion of the theorem that you thought you didn't really understand, you would just like think about it. If you're a serious student, you're going to think about it more before moving on, and then you're going to get to the point where you understand. So you're always going to get to a point where a serious student like that is always going to get to a point where they think they understand it fully. But if you take that and extrapolate it into the future, like, not every serious student is able to learn math just by reading and thinking about theorems. Like, everybody knows you have to actually solve or everybody should know by this point that you have to solve problems. So yeah, in practice, it just, you have to solve problems to get to the point of fully understanding anything that you may have missed out on. And another thing is, solving problems, it's not just about grasping the theorem in the moment. It's not just about reading something and having it fluently make sense in your brain. You also have to actually practice retrieving that from memory. You know how when you read a book, a good story, it makes total sense in your brain, and you fully understand it, and then you finish the book, you don't come back to it for a while, you're not like answering questions about it, and now like you only remember 10% of what happened in there. It's the same thing happens with math. So the problems, they not only force you to grapple with understanding that you miss out on, that you most likely missed out on when reading the theorem, but it's also about hammering it into your brain through a form of retrieval practice, and getting this into your reflexes, where it's you not only think it makes sense in the moment, but it is also like a sort of a brain muscle memory automaticity reaction. Like you can just pull it from your head in any sort of context. It's kind of like, I mean, it's kind of like, here's another sports analogy. Suppose that you take a kid who wants to learn basketball, and you have them come up to the free throw line and they shoot a free throw, and then it goes in the net, swoosh. And that's the first time shooting a ball from the free throw line. Does that mean they're done shooting free throws? Like they've mastered the skill? No, they have to continually practice shooting the ball. Even when you're at a pro level, you have to practice your free throws because you got to keep it fresh in your memory. You have to keep that reflex alive. It's not just about being able to do it once or do it in the moment. Also, like, just because you can shoot a free throw, does that mean that you don't have to practice shooting in a different context? Like when there's a defender in front of you, or when there is when you're doing a fadeaway, or maybe you're not shooting straight on with the hoop, you're a little bit off to an angle, or like there's so many different contexts. And when you're reading the theorem initially, you're kind of in this pure, very serene state where there's not a whole lot of opponents in your way, and it's just you and the problem, kind of like it's just you and the basketball hoop. And it's a lot easier to develop an ability to wrestle with it in that setting. But the point of the problems is to introduce you to various kinds of opponents that you may not have anticipated coming up, and force you to just better ingrain that theorem or the skill in your head, where you can just pull it out, automatic, on the fly, reflex in different situations, and just fully master it. So that's the theorems are essential. The problems are essential to understand the theorems. If you just read through a math book and you think you understand all the theorems, probably what's happening is you actually don't understand them. You just think you understand them, and when you do problems, you'll struggle with it, or there'll be thoughts that come into your head that you didn't think about initially, that the problems force. Additionally, even if in the miraculous, unlikely scenario that you just managed to fully understand the theorems as you were reading through the math book, and you're like, okay, I know all the sort of special cases where this might be a counterintuitive result, that might be a counterintuitive result. Here's how you apply the theorem in different contexts. If that just comes naturally to you, well, you close the math book and wait a while, and it's just going to fall out of your memory. You're not going to, if somebody asks you about it days or weeks later, it's not going to stick in there. You need to actually practice retrieving this information from your head, and that's kind of like what the problems do. That's what they force. So yeah, problems are totally necessary. All right, let's go on. What say you to people who say, It's not really learning to apply a formula without understanding that formula and how to derive it. That seems like an intuitively good take, but again, Math Academy doesn't follow this. Why does this feel so intuitively true, and why may it not be true? I mean, honestly, this is not even intuitively true to me. It's it is, well, how would it not be learning if you go from not being able to apply a formula to being able to apply it? It's this thing is like, it's not learning the full skill yet, right? Okay, the full skill and in its fullest context of mastery is being able to apply the formula and understanding how to derive it. But you can't say that you go from not being able to do something and then you're able to do something. You can't say that's not learning. That is learning. That is the definition of learning. It is being able to do something consistently that you weren't able to do before. Is that the fullest definition of learning? No, but we're just talking about learning in general. And typically the way you scaffold it is you have students practice applying the skill, and then once they're comfortable with that, then you get to go deeper into like, okay, let's talk about why this rule is the way it is. And typically for calculus stuff, that's it, the time when you go and derive all the formulas is actually a later course in real analysis. So I would also completely disagree with the idea that like Math Academy doesn't follow this. It's not that we are foregoing teaching how to derive formulas. It's that we are building math from the ground up, scaffolded as well as we can. And we have not gotten to the point of proving all these calculus formulas yet. That is typically done in a real analysis course. We don't have a real analysis course yet. But when we do, guess what it's going to cover? It's going to cover all these proofs of calculus topics. And it's the same way in like every other subject too. Like in linear algebra, for example. Sometimes people say like, hey, well, your linear algebra course, it's not as rigorous as Axler's linear algebra done right, which goes through a bunch of proofs of all these linear algebra things. But here's the thing: linear algebra done right. That book is not an introductory course in linear algebra. That's a second course in linear algebra. And we often joke at Math Academy that should be called linear algebra done a second time. And it's not that we disagree that the students should learn that stuff. It's just we are building a curriculum from the bottom up, so we have to do the simpler skills first to get these chunks in students' heads, so that they can use those chunks to get the more advanced skills in their heads. So that when it comes time to do the more complicated thing of deriving a formula, they're not wondering, wait, what even is this formula? I'm not familiar with it. No, they should have that in their head, have an idea how the formula works, and we should be at the point where all that they need to focus their working memory on is the proof of it. And additionally, they should also have proof experience beforehand. Like in our methods of proof course, that would be a prerequisite. So we don't have to be simultaneously trying to teach them what a proof is or what a derivation is. Like these subskills need to be, if you want to create a highly scaffolded learning environment where it maximally supports the success of all students, even those with more or less advantageous working memory capacities, you have to build things up from the ground up with subskills. So we want our students to get to the point where they are able to apply these formulas, derive them, reason about them. But this you have to do some things before other things. So we're gonna get there. We're gonna get there. But we haven't written we don't have a full undergrad degree in math built out yet. And we're building things from the core outwards, the core underlying skills outwards. So we're gonna, before we ask a student to derive a formula or prove a formula, we're gonna have to, we need the execution of the formula in place, and we need general, whatever proof or derivation skills are underlying that derivation. We need those in place too. And only once we have those skills in place can we layer the next skill on top. And yeah, we're gonna get there. We're coming for all of this. We're not stopping at just application of the formula. But it does happen that where we are right now is like kind of your first 2 years of undergrad math. That's kind of like the top of our knowledge graph. That tends to be focused more on application of these formulas, and just going through, getting comfortable with what they mean, how to apply them in various scenarios. When we get to the next couple layers of math, like upper undergrad math, like third and fourth there, like abstract algebra and real analysis and Axler's linear algebra, which is really like abstract linear algebra. We will be doing all of this, these proofs and derivations. And another thing I want to point out here is that you can't just jump to proofs and derivations and even if you successfully pull off a proof or derivation of a formula, that does not imply that you have acquired all the knowledge that you would get from executing the formula, and seeing it play out in various scenarios and applying it. I think as a specific counterexample, you can do proofs with eigenvectors and eigenvalues. Just AV equals lambda V. That's you can throw that around in a proof. You can manipulate symbols to get to a desired result. And you can still have no idea how to actually compute an eigenvalue or an eigenvector, and apply it to situations like diagonalizing a matrix. You may know that a matrix can be diagonalized, and it takes a certain form, and you may know a proof supporting that, but that does not automatically imply that you know how to actually diagonalize a given matrix. If I give you a 2x2 matrix and ask you like, how do you diagonalize it for me, and you just say like, well, I proved that this matrix can be diagonalized in my linear algebra class, I'm gonna say like, well, you don't know how to diagonalize it. I don't care if you know how to prove it. That's great, but like, you have not learned the full skill. So I think in general it's a mistake to think about proving and derivation as the all-encompassing component of knowledge. There's really, mastery comes down to, yes, proofs and derivation are a part of it, but so is applying the formula, and getting comfortable with how things work out, and being able to use it. These are separate components of mastery. You can't just do one of them and not do the other and claim that you've got full mastery over the topic in general. You need to do both, and that's what we're going to shoot for. We're going to do both. But there is a relationship between these two components, in that you if you want to scaffold things in a way that is easiest to follow for students, if you want to build up those chunks in students' long-term memory before you throw them problems that that would otherwise explode their working memories, you need to get the skills of using and being familiar and applying the formulas in place before you go down to the derivations and the proofs. And I think even if you think about the idea of a derivation or a proof, that this is like an abstract idea that is meant to encapsulate a lot of concrete examples, right? It's like there's this analogy I made a while ago that was like, if you know how to do a bunch of math proofs and you don't know, you haven't had any experience actually executing these formulas or working with them in applied contexts, solving problems. But you know how the most abstracted form of the idea. It's kind of like your kid who has no life experience, but picked up a book of life quotes and thinks that just because that they read all the life quotes, they know all there is about life. And really, it's the quotes are meant to encapsulate a lot of life experiences. You don't really understand the quote in full value until you have that zoo of concrete experiences that compress into this quote, into this abstracted idea. That's where the power of the abstracted idea comes from. It's from compressing all your concrete examples, your experiences. And yeah, the same thing holds in math. If you don't have a zoo of concrete computational examples, and you try to make the jump to deriving a formula, proving something, pretty quickly you're going to get to the point where you feel like you're just pushing symbols around. You don't actually know what's going on. You can say things that sound smart, but do you actually feel it in your bones what this means? And is this tool like an extension of you in the same way that an instrument is an extension of a professional musician? No, you can't just learn music theory and not actually practice composing songs, playing an instrument, the hands-on part of it, and call yourself a musician. There's it's not enough to know where the tools come from. You also have to be able to use the tools. It's not enough to build the tools. You also have to be able to use the tools. They're separate skills. You got to do it all. Anyway, so we're going to be doing that at Math Academy. It's just it takes time. It takes time to build a math curriculum spanning grade school through university level and beyond. And I guess we're going to continue to get this sort of critique into the future until we actually have those courses in the system. But yeah, we're going to have those courses in the system, and then it'll be clear. All right. Last question for today. Math Academy follows the standard curriculum for schools and universities, but if you had to redesign the curriculum, what would you change? Are the groupings even good? How are they even initially decided? So I think, honestly, I think history has done a pretty good job of identifying like core atomic topics in math. Like things get segmented out pretty well, right? Like there's linear equations, there's quadratic equations. These are two separate things. They're not intermingled into the same. Like you can pick up a textbook, it has it divided out well, and that makes a lot of sense. The lines between topics have been drawn pretty well. Sometimes, actually, pretty often, we split up those lines even further. So linear equations, we might split that up into linear equations, just like x plus a equals b. And we might have another form of linear equation that's like a times x equals b. And then another form that's like a times x plus b equals c. And then maybe another form, there's x's on both sides of the equations. And it might not be split out this well in a textbook, though oftentimes it is split out to some degree. But I don't think the splits are done incorrectly or anything. I think that's about right. It's just a matter of oftentimes more splits are needed. I think what the issue is usually is more about the sequencing of material, and so in a standard curriculum, you typically do things in you cover groups of related material for a week or longer at a time, and whereas what we do at Math Academy is we interleave through all the material. It's like instead of covering a single unit at the time, we cover a single topic from each of a number of different units, and then do that over and over again. And I've written a lot about interleaving and mixed practice, and how that is how that is a more optimal way to go about things. And in short, the thing is, when you practice a group of related material all at the same within a cohesive time span, you're not being forced to switch context and pull the previous context afresh. You're able to keep all this stuff in the front of your mind. It's like you're just getting into the rhythm of shooting 3-pointers everywhere, and you're sinking them, and you're not made to go in for a layup and then come out the other side and then do a 3-pointer, which is a harder thing to do because you have to. It breaks your rhythm. And the point is to break the rhythm, because you want to learn the skills to the point where you're not dependent on the rhythm being there in your head. You're not dependent on having it at the front of your memory in order to recall it again. We want to get you to the point where you're transitioning from doing something kind of unrelated, and now you're forced to pull this information from your head again. And it's like, say you're in calculus, and normally what happens in a calculus class is they'll group the first several weeks of the course just doing limits, and that's it. Maybe the first like a month or two of the course is just limits, and that's it. And so when we do it, we have you doing limits, we have you doing derivatives, we have you doing sequence, convergence, another thing in calculus. We have you doing a bunch of different things, kind of from the beginning. And now you might say, like, well, I was doing great at limits, I had it, and then you made me switch to doing derivatives, and then I lost my rhythm, and now I forgot how to do the limits problems, and now I have to I have to refresh on that a little bit. They feel harder than before. You screwed up my learning. But that's not really screwing up your learning. That's just exposing that you didn't learn it as well as you thought in the first place. And we are forcing you to practice an activity that is forcing you to learn it better. If we don't force you to recall this information, like not having it out of the front of your head, if we don't force you to recall this information kind of like more from scratch, then you're not going to get good at doing it by recalling from scratch. So that's the main difference. I think it's not about the. I think they are chunked up in the right granularity in terms of schools and universities, it seems, but it's just the sequencing is kind of wrong, or kind of suboptimal at least. I mean, I understand that when you're a textbook writer or an instructor, it makes life a lot easier, especially if you are building out a course. If you're teaching off the top of your head, you have limited teaching resources. Like it makes it easier for you to go in batch mode and do all of limits first, then all of derivatives, then all of integrals. Like to have these cohesive units. But in terms of learning the material for the long term, it's not the optimal way to go about it. Now, I guess another kind of perspective on this question is, are there any topics that we would not include at all in our curriculum if we could make the choice to do so? And I would say that there are quite a few topics in the traditional math sequence that they kind of feel like they're just there for the purpose of satisfying some standards. And university math doesn't really build upon them very much. And so personally, I would say that they're not really that necessary, but we kind of need them in there to check the box on traditional courses. One of those types of topics would be like inscribed angles in circles, or like there's a bunch of geometry, like intercepted arcs and yeah, those circle chord theorems, where you never really build upon it, unless you're just doing more geometry like that. But there's not like it doesn't really get built upon very much at all, I think, in university math. So we actually identified, Alex went through and identified a ton of these topics that are kind of just there to check the box on standards. And we made a separate track. We have our traditional and integrated math sequences that cover all those, all the courses comprehensively to the standard. But we also have a math foundation sequence, and it's meant for adult learners who want to shore up their foundational math, pre-university math, to the point where they can learn any university courses that they want. And we don't include things that are just meant to check the box on standards, like those circle theorems from geometry. And so Alex went through and he figured out all the topics that we're able to remove. And it turned out we were able to remove about, I think, like a quarter or a third of the curriculum, of the traditional curriculum. We're able to remove a quarter or a third for our math foundation sequence. So personally, if it were up to me, I think I wouldn't really waste time on those topics if I were thinking about what would I change about the standard curriculum. I would say kind of streamline it a little bit more, and just get to the focus on the most foundational topics. And after you knock out the most foundational topics, just move on to the next level of math. Like, don't spend an extra 50% amount of time in geometry course once you've already knocked out all the core material. Just move on to the next course. Like, get to the university level math, get to the math that that really ends up getting applied a ton in the real world. That's probably what I would change. Now, one additional thing that comes to mind is that as we're building out our machine learning course, we're kind of realizing that there is a shortage um, of good curriculum for machine learning online, even at universities, even in textbooks. And the problem is, it seems like you've got extreme theoretical approaches to machine learning, and you've got extreme applied approaches, and there's nothing, there's very little in between. You've got tutorials online that are like, hey, you want to learn machine learning? Well, just import TensorFlow and run this code, and now you've got a neural net. And run your neural net. Oh, congrats, you've trained a neural net. Now you know neural nets. Like, no. You've learned how to implement a neural net, you piggybacking off of an existing library, but that's not the full mastery of neural nets. At the same time, you've also got textbooks that are focused on, like, maybe they'll present the back propagation algorithm for training a neural net, and you'll have to maybe implement that in code, or maybe prove something about it. But it's kind of missing this component of actually feeling the algorithm in your bones, going through and doing some by hand examples. Not overly tedious, not saying that you have to go manually work out 100 iterations of back propagation in a 5-layer neural net. Like, it's, what I'm getting at is, though, like, you need reps on these algorithms. You need to go through them and work them out by hand and really feel how all the nuts and bolts are moving together, and develop that sort of high level of automaticity of in your bones, by heart intuition for the algorithm. Almost like you know how to multiply numbers or add numbers. Like, you can add numbers by stacking one on top of the other, do the addition with carrying. Like, if you really want to know machine learning and want to know it well, you need to do some similar practice with the machine learning algorithms. And so I think that's a component that is missed from other curricula for machine learning. And so that's one thing that we're going to be bringing in to our machine learning course. It's going to be heavily centered on these by hand problems. Now, we're going to have coding problems too, where you apply what you've learned to, like, build a neural net, code it up, apply it to model, maybe do some image classification. We're going to have tons of projects like that. But what we're going to do is we're going to make sure that by the time you get to the projects, everything is so scaffolded up. You have developed a high degree of mastery on all these component skills. You feel the neural net backprop algorithms in your bones. You know it's just flowing through you. You've got it. And when it comes time to code it up, you don't have to think about, wait, how does this work again? I forget what how to even go about the algorithm. I forget how numbers flow through it. No, you've gotten to the point where you know exactly how the numbers flow through it, and you can focus on the implementation of it. And we're going to make you do all that by scratch in Python, and you're going to build your own neural net. And so you're kind of bridge from theory to application that way. Now, things about well, one thing that we're not going to have in our machine learning courses just yet is going to be like proving theorems about machine learning algorithms. Maybe we'll have like some really key results like the universal approximation theorem, but in general, the field of, you can go like super deep into theoretical machine learning, and it's still like kind of an area of active research. And most people who sign up for a machine learning course, it's they don't want to become like pure theorists. They want to learn how to, what do these algorithms do? How do they do what they do? How do I code this up? And how do I go apply this to do cool stuff? So that's what we're going to be focusing on. Of course, that leaves the door open to maybe additional courses in machine learning where we take a more theoretical treatment and have more of a focus on proofs. If there's market demand for such courses. But it'd be a similar situation to what I talked about with calculus versus real analysis. Calculus is more like the application of calculus ideas, working through problems in concrete examples. Real analysis is more about the theoretical underpinnings of calculus, proving things. Same way with linear algebra versus abstract linear algebra, or Axler's linear algebra for the second course in linear algebra. And it would be a similar way with machine learning, where our at least the courses that we're focused on right now are the application of these things. And now theoretical, I should say, real analysis, abstract linear algebra. We're definitely going to have all those courses on the system at some point, because we want to fill out the undergrad math curriculum, and the undergrad math curriculum includes those courses: real analysis and abstract linear algebra. You go look at a top university's math program, and they're going to have those kind of courses. And so we want to kind of match up our offerings with that. But something like theoretical machine learning, that's not a standard part of an undergrad curriculum. So I don't know if we'd get to that. It would all depend on kind of market demand, whether people really want that. Anyway, I think that wraps up this this Q&A. So next time I'll kind of rotate the categories. I think next time probably go over to coding. Was that the second? Yeah, that was the next highest. Yeah, the next time will be coding. All right, till next time.